Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Today, conservation groups say unless the government acts now, it'll fail to meet nature restoration targets and will break the law.
If they don't do something fast and something big, then they could well fail to meet the legally binding targets to turn around the decline in nature.
We'll have more on that in just a moment. First, all this week, we're giving you a treat, a taste of the British cheese board. And today we're talking about goat's cheese. Husband and wife Fraser Norton and Rachel Yarrow run a goat farm in Carmarthenshire, where they produce Norton and Yarrow cheese. Our reporter Mary-Claire Carey-Jones has been to meet them to follow the cheese-making process from the goat shed to the shops.
We've got about 250 in total. Everything's in at the moment. Come the spring, they'll be going out on the pastures during the day.
And that's quite unusual for goats in the UK, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yeah. There's about 45,000 commercial goats in the UK, dairy goats. Almost all of those are usually permanently housed. But yeah, I'm kind of a bit obsessed with the idea of trying to make a similar model to what people do with cows, milking predominantly from grass and grazed grass, making that work with dairy goats.
What sort of a difference does grazing them on grass make?
Well, they say that 40% of the flavour of a cheese comes from the diet of the goats. I mean, it'd be hard to quantify that, I suppose. But I think for me, it's a lot about working with the seasons, working with what you've got around and doing that in sort of as an efficient and logical way as possible. This is our milking parlour. It's got 36 places.
It's very like a cow milking parlour, just on a much smaller scale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same, apart from goats have 2 teats rather than 4, so you have 2 clusters. Otherwise, very similar process.
First thing we do when we enter the cheese is wash our hands. So this started life 2 days ago, just as milk. Basically, we added a starter culture and then added rennet. And then we ladle it into these draining bags that you can see hanging up here. And then on the 3rd day, we're taking the curd now, which is separated from the whey. We're adding some salt to it by hand, mixing it up. And then we're pressing it into those pyramid moulds. Tomorrow, we'll be unmoulding those. And after that, then they go into the maturing rooms, which is quite quick. We're talking about a matter of days and weeks.
You're making a soft cheese here, but you've recently started developing a hard goat cheese. Why have you done that?
Basically, that's to deal with the fluctuations in milk. You get a peak of milk production in the middle of summer, if you do traditional kidding, which we're doing. And so that gives you a little bit of an issue because you've got peak milk just when demand for cheese drops off. So what people traditionally do in France and other European countries is they take that summer milk and make it into a harder cheese that you can mature for 3 to 6 months, and you sell the cheese in the winter months in the build up to Christmas when it's absolute peak demand.
Well, I've now come to Cardiff to meet Owen Davis, who runs Teak House, a cheese shop in the centre of the city.
There's so many different goat cheeses produced in the UK now, and they're lighter for people to digest, they're easier for digestion. So we've had a great increase in demand for goat cheese.
And you've put together a lovely cheese board in front of us with cheeses from the farm where I've been earlier today.
We've got the Cinedon Hill, the Brightwell ash, which is coated in an ash coating, and then this is their new goat cheese at the end, which is soon to be launched this year.
So when people are thinking of putting together a cheese board, is goat's cheese something that they're thinking of?
Yeah, most definitely. There's now more awareness of goat cheese. Often they're quite creamy and much lighter cheese, so it kind of gives a good balance to the board. And that's why it's great to see somebody like Norton and Yarrow produce their amazing goat cheeses.
Well, I hope Mary-Claire Carey-Jones had a chance to taste that. Sounds delicious. As we reported last week, the Oxford Farming Conferences saw politicians from all 4 UK nations talking about their devolved plans for their post-Brexit support schemes for farmers. We've heard from DEFRA Secretary Emma Reynolds already, so for the rest of the week we're going to hear from the farming ministers from Wales, Northern Ireland and today Scotland. Jim Fairlie, Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity in the Scottish Government, highlighted the different support that Scottish farmers will get, Where England now pays farmers only for the environmental work they do, the Scottish Government will retain a payment based on how much land farmers have.
There are 5 key priorities, and it's about farmers basically taking a benchmark of where they are. Understanding their own soil. We want to make sure they're incorporating animal welfare plans, pesticide plans. So there are 5 fundamental things that we're asking them to have a look at. We've done the first 2, and then they'll be able to bring the rest in as we go forward. We are working with the industry to take them forward. But we keep getting this narrative about, but we need absolute certainty. Well, we've given you certainty. We've kept direct payments. We're keeping those direct payments right up until 2030. We know that that's what's coming, and we're developing the policies that you need to be able to farm, deliver for biodiversity, justify that public spend that we put into the industry, and then make sure that we're developing it with you as we go forward from there. So there are a number of different things that are going on, but people have got this belief that it's a disaster because there's an awful lot of narrative about things having happened in England that threw people off the edge of a cliff, and we didn't do that.
What you can hear in the background is a tractor protest here outside the Oxford Farming Conference, aimed, in fact, at the Secretary of State for the Environment and from English farmers about English policies. Although in England, it has been a much faster process. Yeah. You're still feeling your way. In England, they're right on into it.
Yeah, well, they're going faster, but it's not working in terms of getting people to say, right, OK, I'm not quite sure about this. I'll find my way and I'll come with you on the journey. So that's what we're doing. We're taking people on a journey. And a farm is not something you turn overnight. A farm is something that you think, Ricky, how do I do this over the next 2, 5, 10 years? How do I transition? So we've got to make sure that we are taking them with us, and that's why we're doing it in this way.
Although environmentalists say by keeping that direct subsidy link, you're actually not asking farmers to do what needs to be done in Scotland to improve the environment.
Well, I would dispute that, and I get where you're going to go with this. You're going to talk about the fact that we've had members of environmental groups have walked out of the ARIOB.
Walked out of the board that discusses
the
all this.
Board, yeah, that's the Agricultural Reform and Implementation and Oversight Board. They're an advisory body, and they've walked out of it. And that's a decision that they will have to justify. I think it will backfire on them, to be perfectly honest, because there is a thing about making sure you're in the room and having a conversation about what's being done.
Well, they said they were fed up of conversations in which they were not being listened to.
Well, they are being listened to. Doesn't mean to say you're going to get everything that you want. Now, every single farmer we talk to, they'll say, why are you making us do this? And we've got to justify doing that. The environmental bodies are saying, you need to go harder. And I say, well, how do we get the farmers to do that? Because this is entirely about people. These people are the ones who keep us, they're the stewards of our countryside, they produce our food. They're also the ones that we're asking to deliver biodiversity, to deliver the carbon emissions reductions, and to be efficient. So we're asking them to do all of those things, and yet we've got other people saying, oh, you're not going fast enough, you're not making them go hard enough. Well, we're making them go at a pace that they're prepared to go with us. To ask farmers who have never done it before to suddenly turn 5% of their land into an ecological focus area. But we're having to do that in a way that allows them to say, that's not going to have a massive impact on my productivity. But once we've done the 5%, we're then going to 7%. So that's a big thing. It's not about individual farms. It's about how we do this nationally. And if we give the incentives to farmers to deliver those things, then I believe that the farming industry will do it because they want to do it.
As you'll be aware, what the farming industry is really worried about is the longevity of this, particularly because of the budget. They want guarantees on the budget. Yeah. Can they have them?
Not unless we're back in the EU, or unless the UK government suddenly say to us, right, OK, guys, we're going to give you a 7-year funding envelope that you can guarantee that you can pay your farmers, because that's what we had while we were in the EU. We don't have that multi-annual year funding, and we don't have the guarantees that we would normally have. Annual budgets are still how we get the vast majority of our funding, so that's just the reality of it.
Well, Charlotte Smith was talking to Jim Fairlie, Minister for Agriculture in Scotland, and she'll also be talking to Andrew Muir from Northern Ireland and Wales's Hugh Iranka-Davis on Farming Today tomorrow and Thursday. Wildlife and environment groups say this government could become the first to break the law by missing targets to restore nature. Today, the Office for Environmental Protection, the OEP, publishes its annual report on the government's progress, and it shows that it is not on track to meet 21 of the 43 legally set targets. Richard Benwell is CEO of Wildlife and Countryside Link, which represents 94 countryside and wildlife groups across Britain. I asked him why progress has been so slow.
I don't think we should say they're going to fail yet, Anna. I think we're going to say that if they don't do something fast and something big, then they could well fail to meet the legally binding targets to turn around the decline in nature. And the reason? Well, we know there are all sorts of pressures on nature, don't we? Unsustainable agriculture is one of them. Heavy industry, land use change, overfishing. But there is still time for the government to meet its targets, but it needs to react with urgency and it needs to take this as seriously as it would, say, a serious economic shock.
Do the details show any particular part of nature recovery which is working less well than others?
There's progress in some areas, so we should flag that the government's been doing a good job on air pollution. But on biodiversity, on nature recovery, that's where we are most worried that at the moment the scale of response isn't anywhere near in proportion to the urgency of the crisis of turning around our decline. Farming has got to be at the forefront. We shouldn't just be playing around the edges of making do with a finite pot of funding. The government should be looking at driving forward revolution, change and a brilliant future for farming, because without it, we're definitely not going to meet those nature restoration targets. Or water quality, for that matter. That's going to be big this year, isn't it?
Well, before we talk about the changes that you think the government should concentrate on, they've sent us a list of all the things it says it's already done. A revised environmental improvement plan, the largest nature-friendly farming budget in history, £11.8 billion to be spent across this Parliament, 2 new national forests, £1 billion spent on tree planting. I mean, there is a list of things that the government says it's already done and is doing.
Well, this is the perennial problem of nature reporting, that it ends up being long lists of stuff what we are doing, rather than a scientific look at what it would take to actually meet the targets. And I'm not pouring cold water on some of the good things that the government has done, but the question is it enough? And the answer from the OEP, the government's own watchdog, is that although there have been some good glimmers, we're still not taking the scale of effort or the speed of effort that would be needed to meet those targets.
So what does the government need to do then?
Well, none of it is rocket science. When it comes to marine restoration, we're talking about making sure that we are fishing at sustainable levels instead of perpetual overfishing and not scarifying the bottom of the ocean with massive trawlers. For farming, it's making sure that we don't just pay people for the income foregone around the edges of doing environmental schemes, but actually we drive forward loads of contracts for nature-friendly farming, and it needs to happen at scale and at speed.
Funding across the government departments is really stretched, isn't it? DEFRA says it wants more private investment. Do you agree that that would help?
It's not a matter of just helping, it's absolutely vital. And that means making sure that responsible industries pay. And over the last few months, I've been to developer events where the developers say, oh, we're the ones that shoulder all the burden for nature recovery. I've been to water events where that sector says, we do far more than anybody else for nature. And I've been to farming events where people are keen to point out just how much some farmers are doing for nature recovery. The point is that none of these yet add up to enough investment in nature, and the government needs not just to be facilitating investment or setting nice standards, but it needs to be using strong regulatory interventions to make polluters pay.
Richard Benwell from Wildlife and Countryside Link. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.